Today in the episode, Ukrainian armed forces respond on Russia's strikes. Important for Putin's army plant are hit. Ukrainians are coming together and help each other while Russia continues its cynical strike during winter cold. Sanctions in action. 20% of Kremlin's shadow fleet has already been stopped. Drones have attacked Russia's Rostov region last night. Fuel storage tanks at the Urals plant were likely hit. It provides petrol to the Russian army. Damage to residential areas was also recorded. The Russian air defense response and the fall of debris caused fires in several high-rise residential buildings. Moreover, Russian missile system Pantsir directly strike the building. Russian propaganda usually uses such cases to accuse Ukrainian Defense Forces of shelling Russian civilians. But the truth is, Kremlin blame others in what it does by itself. Ukraine responds on Russian attacks. In temporarily Russian-occupied Mariupol and Crimea, drone strikes hit electrical substations, leaving the city without electricity and heating. According to the commander of Unmanned Systems Forces, Magyar, drones hit the Azovska substation in temporary occupied Crimea, and a substation Myrna near Mariupol. Also, the Unmanned Systems Brigade Magyar's Birds destroyed a missile and artillery weapons depot of the Russian 51st Army in Makiivka. Ukraine's defense forces struck the defense industry plant Atlant-Aero in the Russian city of Taganrog. The general staff stated the target was hit. Explosions and a fire were recorded in the vicinity of the production buildings. This strike is a part of efforts to reduce the offensive capabilities of the Russian aggressor. Ukrainian units used domestically produced missiles to strike the plant. Atlant-Aero is involved in the full cycle of design, production, and testing of Molniya strike reconnaissance drones, as well as components for Orion UAVs. These drones Russian army used to attack both Ukrainian army and civilians. In 2025, Russian strikes on Ukraine caused significantly more civilian casualties than in previous years, despite Kremlin claims about readiness for peace. According to the Institute for the Study of War, the intensity and scale of Russian attacks have increased rather than declined. Bloomberg, citing assessments by European governments, reports that most civilian casualties occurred after March 2025, when the presidents of the United States and Russia agreed to begin talks on a possible ceasefire. More than 2,000 civilians were killed after those talks began, and another 220 people died after reports of a peace plan appeared in November. These figures show that while Moscow was talking about peace, Russian attacks on civilians were intensifying, making clear that the Kremlin is not seeking to end the war.
The enemy is resorting to massive missile and airstrikes against our rear areas, deliberately targeting energy facilities and using freezing temperatures as an additional instrument of pressure and terror against Ukrainians. During December 2025 and in early January 2026, the enemy carried out 6 large-scale missile and drone attacks on the territory of Ukraine. In this context, our top priority is to strengthen Ukraine's air shield by obtaining air defense systems and munitions, in particular those that can be provided by the American side. Oleksandr Syrsky, Commander-in-Chief of the Armed Forces of Ukraine, on Telegram.
Russia's attacks on Ukraine are starting to hit American consumers as well. Since late December, Russian strikes have damaged at least 4 Ukrainian sunflower oil plants and export terminals, including facilities operated by international companies. Russia has also repeatedly targeted port infrastructure and ships waiting to load, disrupting Ukraine's ability to export vegetable oils. As a result, global sunflower oil supplies have tightened, pushing prices higher on international markets. Analysts warn that when exports from a key supplier like Ukraine are disrupted, price increases spread across global food chains, pushing up costs for processed foods and canned goods, including in the United States. Overnight on January 14th, Russia launched another combined air attack on Ukraine. Ukrainian air defenses intercepted a ballistic missile and destroyed 89 drones. A day earlier, Russian forces struck 15 critical infrastructure sites, including energy facilities, according to Deputy Minister for Communities and Territorial Development, Kostyantin Kovalchuk. In Kyiv, with temperatures near -20 Celsius, around 500 apartment buildings were left without heating and hot water supply. And in many neighborhoods, electricity is available for only a few hours a day. Russia is trying to break Ukrainians their cold and darkness, but across the country, people are once again coming together. As Russia continues its attacks on Ukraine and undermines diplomatic efforts, pressure on its economy is increasing. According to Bloomberg, the price of Russia's flagship Urals crude has fallen to around $34 per barrel. Analysts note that prices have returned to levels seen at the start of Vladimir Putin's first presidential term. At the same time, Urals is trading at nearly $20 below the price built into Russia's 2026 state budget, which is set at $59 per barrel. Russian officials say that even with lower revenues, spending priorities will not change, with most available money still going to the war against Ukraine rather than to ordinary people. The war of Russia against Ukraine has brought the Russian economy to a near standstill. By the end of 2025, GDP growth had fallen to its lowest level in recent years, indicating the economy has entered stagnation. Sanctions pressure from Europe and the United States is further exacerbating Russia's economic abyss. Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky noted that, thanks to coordinated actions of Kyiv and its allies, at least 20% of Moscow's shadow fleet has been stopped. More details in the next story for you.
The task of everyone who wants this war to end lies in reducing Russia's ability to adapt to pressure. Effective pressure on the aggressor is the main fertilizer for the diplomatic process. Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky is convinced.
Thanks to our coordinated measures with some states to pressure the shadow fleet, at least 20% of the fleet's vessels have stopped, and Russia is trying to compensate for this loss by engaging new ships. All of them must be added to the sanctions lists. We will continue sanctions pressure on tanker crews, captains, insurers, and the entire infrastructure of the shadow fleet. The restrictions on Russian seaborne oil exports currently in place should reduce Russia's revenues by at least $30 billion on an annual basis. Additional pressure will definitely increase this volume of Russian losses and thus reduce the financing of the Russian war. Volodymyr Zelensky, President of Ukraine, on Telegram.
Let us remind you that on January 9th, the United States detained the tanker Olena in the Caribbean Sea. It became the fifth vessel detained in recent times. Thus, Washington is intensifying measures to restrict Venezuelan oil exports. Last week, in the waters between Iceland and the British Isles, the tanker Bella 1 was stopped and later renamed Marinera. It was sailing under the Russian flag. And in the Caribbean Sea, the American side detained a vessel of Russia's shadow fleet, Sofia.
The US conducted a military operation to intercept the motor vessel Bella 1 in the North Atlantic on its way to Russia. The UK, at the request of the US, supported this operation as part of global efforts to crack down on sanctions busting and shadow shipping activity. Following a request from the US, I authorised the use of UK bases and the deployment of Royal Navy and RAF assets to support the operation, including airborne surveillance and the RFA ship Tide Force.
It is worth noting that earlier London defined the legal basis for raids by British forces, during which hundreds of vessels of Russia's shadow fleet may be seized, and any vessels subject to sanctions may become the object of such operations if they sail under a false flag.
These steps reflect genuine leadership. The UK has been among the most active jurisdictions in sanctioning shadow fleet vessels, and its implementation of the G7 oil price cap makes the London market less hospitable for sanction-evading actors, from a publication by The Telegraph.
Meanwhile, Switzerland, despite its neutral status, has added another 41 tankers of the shadow fleet transporting Russian oil to the new sanctions list. In particular, the blacklist includes 2 companies from the United Arab Emirates, as well as the Vietnamese Hung Phat Maritime Trading and the Russian Sever Trans Bunker Company Limited. And Sweden's foreign minister appealed to EU foreign policy chief Kaja Kallas to include Swedish proposals in the EU's 20th sanctions package against the Russian Federation. This concerns a complete ban on maritime services for any vessels transporting Russian energy resources, strengthening measures against Russian fertilizer exports to the EU, and abolishing the value threshold for luxury items. Sweden is convinced that restrictions imposed on Russia's energy sector and shadow fleet have significantly reduced Moscow's revenues that it can use for military aggression against Ukraine.
The Institute for the Study of War continues to assess that increased Western economic pressure on Russia, along with helping Ukraine maintain and even increase pressure on the battlefield, remains critical to changing Putin's calculus and forcing Putin to face more serious trade-offs between continuing to pursue his maximalist war aims and sacrificing the quality of life of the Russian people, from a report by the Institute for the Study of War.
The Russian people are paying for Putin's priorities, as Russian banks are shifting all consequences of credit pressure onto them. The civilian sector is also suffering, as Russia faces a labor shortage and a mid-level wage crisis. After all, high salaries in the military-industrial sector have caused inflation and price surges, analysts from the Institute for the Study of War emphasize. Reported by Yulia Hranovska, UATV News.
That's all for today's News Digest. Stay informed, stay critical, like the video, subscribe, and share your thoughts in the comments. See you next time.